Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for the fourth and final segment of my discussion with Forrester analysts Joseph Blankenship and Dr. Chase Cunningham on security operations and SOAR. Gentlemen, in this fourth and final segment, I want to talk a little bit about MSSPs, MDRs, security service providers in general, and how SOAR relates to this market. Now, one of the things that we realized in Siemplify is that the vast majority of security operations centers or functions out there are hybrid to some extent, right? I think the days where you're a big organization and you run your SOC soup to nuts, or you're a small organization and you just outsource the entire function to service providers, those days are very hard to come by these days. What we find is that almost every security operations center has some sort of hybrid flavor where some of the functions are carried out by service providers and some of the functions are carried out by the local security team, right? It can be the traditional, oh, tier one is outsourced and we do tier two, tier three. It can be, oh, we do, this specific task, but we need help from service providers on specialized operations like threat hunting or penetration testing that we can't do ourselves. But it is hybrid to some extent, right? So, JB, maybe I'll start with you. I mean, you come from a service provider background. I'm guilty of coming from a service provider background as well. Tell me a little bit about how you see SOAR fit into the service provider ecosystem.
Yeah, and I mean, the last MSSP that I went to work for, I can remember day one, right? I showed up and they're going to do some training for us, and this guy comes in and he's trailing this giant sheet of like paper, and he comes into this conference room, starts taping this giant thing up all around the conference room, and the other people in the room and I are just kind of sitting there going, what in the hell is he doing? We thought this guy had lost his mind. He's like a giant, like elementary school science project or something going on. And he says, this is one of our SOC processes that we have mapped out on this sheet of brown paper. We called this our brown paper process. And it had gone all over the room. And this is like probably 14 feet of this thing. And they had these things hanging up all over the SOC. Once we got back to the SOC and in the hallways. And so you think about that, right? All right, so they've gone into the trouble to map out, all the steps in a workflow and put it on this giant piece of brown craft paper. And anybody who's ever been to the butcher shop knows what I'm talking about, right? Giant sheet of, brown craft paper. And they put this stuff up. How operational is that? So I get an incident as an analyst. I'm going to work it. What do? Do I get up and walk over to the brown sheet of paper and go, all right, I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to go down here, then I'm going to contact Chase, and then Chase is going to do this piece? I mean, that's not how things work, right? So you have to be able to take that silly, and I can only say this because that company doesn't exist anymore, right? So I'm protecting the innocent and the guilty. But we were able to put that kind of nonsense to bed because now we've got better tools, things like SOAR systems, right? They actually encapsulate all of that stuff. So we don't need 14 feet of brown craft paper to tell us what our process is. Now we're actually able to do that inside of a system. And to me, I think it's vital for service providers to have that. For one thing, you need consistency, right? You need consistency for the way your analysts are operating, the way all your clients are being treated, et cetera. You need operational efficiency. One of the biggest problems in MSSP or NDR is the cost of human capital, right? People are really, really expensive. And if we're not getting the most value out of those people, we're never going to be economically successful as a service provider. So introducing efficiencies into that equation is incredibly important. And that's another real strength, I think, of SOAR tools. And then lastly, maybe as you said, almost everybody operates in sort of a hybrid sort of environment. We also need a way to communicate to the customer, right? because I can be the greatest MSSP in the universe, but at a certain point, I'm going to need the client to go take an action themselves, right? Or maybe somebody from their IT operations are going to have to take an action. I need to be able to do that automatically. You know, right now, a lot of MSSPs still operate in the, hey, we found a thing, I'll email it to you, or I'll Slack it to you, and then hopefully somebody picks that up, and it falls away. We have no way to see that the loop has been closed. We have no way to go back and measure that to see how effective it was. So that's another way that, you know, like a SOAR tool, I push that out to the client, opens a ticket, ticket gets worked, ticket gets closed, close the loop, report on it. Hey, we can go back and demonstrate the value we delivered for that client, because now we're not just sending bizarre events, you know, via email and Slack and everything else. Instead, we're sending a ticket, you know, a ticket is part of a workflow that gets closed, and then we report on that at the end of the quarter.
Right. So I think you hit on two very important points. One, of course, is the operational efficiency, which, you know, when your SOC is your business, that's a completely different level of discussion. And again, from our experience, we find that when we have discussions around SOAR with MSSPs, it's much more of a business discussion, right? Because here you're really cutting cost out of the function that ultimately generates revenue for your organization. Whereas in enterprises, right, then security is at the end of the day, it's a cost center, right? I think somebody once told me the whole problem of security starts with the fact that for the defenders, it's a cost center, but for the attackers, it's a P&L, right? So you can kind of look at that at that asymmetry. So I think you hit on a great point of operational efficiency. You hit on a great point of collaboration, right? There's and still, and overwhelms me every time, right? That email back and forth over the fence, right? With zero visibility, you know, did anybody act on this? Chase, what I want to talk with you maybe is a little bit about maybe more next generation services, right? I think, you know, the MSSPs, it's a very lucrative space, but I think it's also a very competitive space, and one that's becoming harder to create differentiation in, right? You read two web pages of two service providers. Too often it just sounds exactly the same, right? And so maybe what we see at least is also source and enabler to push out these new playbooks or functionality and services. Talk maybe a little bit about the competitive dynamics of the MSSP market and where you see SOAR fitting in.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. Like the market for MSSPs, I mean, it's a horse race, and it's a horse race by, you know, the neck. Nobody is running roughshod away from the competition, just based on the sort of basics that are required to do the job. I think where you do see some difference in that space is really around those that can do this and kind of eat their own dog food, have the capability to show you that they can do things at the scale that is required. A lot of times folks will engage with an MSSP and they just go, well, they have a room with lots of blinking lights and big TVs on the wall. And like JB said, you know, folks with drinking monsters and hoodies on, so therefore they must be amazing SOC personnel. And in reality, it's really not about that. It's about, you know, how they're able to do this without putting it on giant pieces of butcher paper and spreadsheets and whatever else. So it's necessary for organizations that are going to get into this to look at the horses in that race and kind of say, how do you operationalize scale and what capabilities do you have to do this across infrastructure? If they can't, and then that's a real problem, because that's where you're going. That's what you're going to be doing.
JB, one of the things that we hear a lot, and I'm sure you guys as well, from the end user side, right? If you look at maybe the number one concern / complaint that end users voice towards their service providers is the lack of transparency, right? I don't know what these guys are doing for me, right? I have no idea if these guys are even, you know, doing anything for me. And I think what we find is when service providers and end users collaborate on the same platform, there's really full visibility on every, I mean, you can double click on every alert and see every action that that the analyst on the service provider side did. And of course, then if at some point it gets handed over, then the service provider can see everything that the end user continue to do with a specific alert or threat. Talk to me a little bit about, you know, where this hits you guys from where you stand advising, I assume, to both MSSPs and end customers. about the need for more transparency in this business.
Yeah, and I mean, that's actually something that came up at my last role at the MSSP as well. Is we started having customers, come to, for the longest time, MSSPs had enjoyed this sort of a role where, it was sort of a black box, right? We sort of sold MSSP as being like the easy button of security. Hey, just leave the driving to us, we'll handle everything. And what I realized, kind of about early in my tenure there, was it's not a good message to send to clients, right? Because clients need to be invested in their security themselves, right? So it actually has to be a collaboration between the service provider and the customer. So we also had customers starting to come to us at a certain point, and they were saying, we don't understand the value that we get from our investment with you guys. All we really see is a barrage of emails with incidents attached to them. And then at the end of the month or end of the quarter, I get a report saying you worked X amount of incidents, and I have absolutely zero idea. Did that make me safer? Did that make me more secure? Did it reduce my risk? How many of those were true positives? How many were false positives? None of that stuff, ever got in there. And one of the values that I saw, with SOAR, and I was kind of alluding to this before, is having that closed loop system, so that there is no real, there is no black box anymore. There is no, people behind the curtain, so to speak. Even if you go to a lot of MSSP portals, and basically what the portal is going to show the customer is, here's a bunch of activities that happened. No data behind the activities, none of the what. And I think that's what customers really want to see. They actually want to see what are they paying for, right? Where are they getting value from having a human analyst do a thing versus tools do a thing? And I think that's one of the values of having having a single source of truth in something like a source system for doing all those operations.
Yeah, and I'll share, I think, an interesting story from one of our service provider customers. And again, this is where this differs, I guess, from end user customers. Is, talk to one of our service provider customers, and the biggest value that they say, I mean, there's the operational efficiency and the playbooks and the orchestration and process consistency, all of that stuff. But the number one benefit that they talked about was the fact that they can automate the reporting function. So apparently, sending that report to the customer every month, they had to pull together different data from different systems, and it would take weeks. So if you're the customer, you got your report of what did my MSSP do for me in January, you probably got it towards the end of February, right? and again, it took several weeks. And now with SOAR, that process is automated, all the data is there, the report's automated, and you get your report of what did my MSSP do for me in January on February 1st, right? So, as even like, again, I think as MSSP, this is your business. You have to demonstrate the value that you provide to your customers, or they may not renew, right? So, just an anecdote to your point.
Yeah, no, it's a question that comes up too in inquiry, Nimi, to be quite honest with you. I cover, not only SOAR, but also, a lot of like SOC operations technologies, right? Like things like SIMs and so forth. And so what you'll see is customers will vacillate between, we're going to go all in on an MSSP, or, we weren't successful with this MSSP. So we think we buy our own SIM and do it ourselves, we're going to be so much more successful. So like from the service provider standpoint, it's really kind of behooves them to lean into the customer and like take away that whole black box idea, because what the customer really needs to see is how much work is involved with this stuff. They have no idea what the MSSP is doing on their behalf, and so if the MSSP can't demonstrate that substantially, then that value just never gets they never understand it, right? Never gets communicated.
Right, and I think if there's one message that maybe one of the take-home points maybe of this four-part series towards the end is really, and we proclaim this, really the death of the black box MSSP, right? I mean, you will not win if you will continue to be a black box MSSP. Not only do customers kind of no longer put up with it, but I think it's also very limiting from a business perspective, because one of the black box MSSPs is, I've got this tech in the background, don't worry about it, I've got you covered. And the customer says, well, I've invested in this EDR platform. Can you use that? well, no, I know I can't support that. That's not part of my little, black box tool. You're going to have to uninstall that, or, and use my EDR, proprietary EDR, whatever I stand on. Oh, well, but I've invested in this SIM. Can you work with this SIM? No, you got to send your logs to my proprietary SIM. So again, having also, been part of MSSPs, the last thing an MSSP wants to do is walk away from business because they don't support the specific technologies that a customer has. So Chase, again, as again, somebody who's spent so many years in the trenches, I'd love to, and I think you always kind of have an interesting perspective of what good looks like. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, from the MSSP side, what does good look like? What are the companies that are successful doing? And also, what does bad look like? What would you advise to people to MSSPs to stay away from, or for end users who are in an MSSP selection process?
I mean, I think good looks like the organizations where you're able to have metrics that allow you to track that things are getting bigger, better, faster. I mean, you should be seeing sort of a reduction in, mean time to response and some of those other things that we typically can say, like, this is a line in the sand of what I was doing and this is where I'm going. So I think that there's a lot of value in being able to say this relationship is helping me move faster, respond faster, eliminate more threats. You need to have some sort of metrics that you can track and be able to vector in on what the return on that investment looks like. I think too, you should see from your providers that they are, like JB was saying, that they're tied to the hip with you. The black box stuff and them saying like, "Don't worry, man, we got it." Like that's a non-starter. If that happens during a selection process, tell them like, "There's the door," because that's just not going to fly. And then on the user side, lastly, really should be focused on being able to offload some of the stuff that you shouldn't need to do. If you're still in that sort of phase where you feel like I don't trust that this relationship is actually doing what I think it should be doing, why continue to be engaged in that? I shouldn't have to babysit my MSSP. I'm paying for that service. They should be able to tell me and show me and prove to me that they're actually providing me a return on the money that I'm cutting to that invoice every month.
And another thing to always think about with MSSPs too is they are in the same talent crunch everyone else is. So they have an employee retention problem too. So it definitely behooves the MSSP to take a lot of that grunt work that nobody really wants to do off of folks. I remember this vividly. It's been deleted since, Nemi, but there was a person that put on Glassdoor at the MSSP where I worked previously. He posted this thing saying a warm hot dog could do his job. And, because all he did all day was just copy, paste, coming out of the proprietary system, like you were talking about, into the journaling system, and then emailing that off to clients, right? And so this is a person who had gone brain dead doing their job. Take that stuff away from people. Don't let people become warm hot dogs, man. Make them useful, let them use their brains, let them grow as analysts.
That's excellent. Again, and just to kind of close the loop on SOAR, interestingly enough, we're seeing interest in SOAR in this hybrid environment, of course, from the MSSP side, make their their processes more efficient, work on the same platform as their end users, and all the stuff that we mentioned. But we've also seen interest in SOAR from the end user. I'm going to buy a SOAR solution, even though maybe I outsource a fair chunk of my operations to an MSSP. So I know everything that's going on. I can keep tabs on my MSSP, and I own the platform where all the work around threat detection and response on my network happen. It's not owned by the MSSP. It's owned by me, the end user. Always talk about service providers saying, yeah, you can outsource your security monitoring or whatever it is. What you can never outsource is accountability, right? If you get breached, you can't point a finger at your MSSP. You own it. Gentlemen, I think this has been an outstanding 4-part segment. We've had 1,000 people trying to dig a hole with spoons. I think we've had doctors telling you you're sick, but not telling you what the cure is. And of course, we've had the wisdom of don't let your employees become warm hot dogs. And if that's not a clothing thought, I don't know what is. So Chase Cunningham, Dr. Chase Cunningham, And Joseph Blankenship, thank you so much for your insight. And we hope to chat again soon enough.